Okay, take it away, Paul.
Got it. Okay, we've talked about SDRs before a couple of times over the years. I wanted to kind of take a different approach tonight because when most people talk about SDR, software-defined radios, they talk about either the receiver side of an HF transceiver that you buy and sit on your table in front of you, or a little box or dongle that plugs into your computer and then connect an antenna to it, and it turns your computer into a really powerful radio receiver. I want to talk tonight about the Utah WebSDR and some other devices like it scattered around the country and the world, in fact. And specifically from the standpoint of what we can learn about radio from playing with these things, because I've never seen that approach taken before. So first, I've got a bunch of little video clips here prepared. I'm going to see if we can get away without using them. And if I can go live to the, that's not what I wanted to do. We can go live to the WebSDR. This is, well, first of all, I need to show you the pictures of what's up there. And these pictures are going to tell you why this is something you really need to do if you can pull it up on your browser. All right, so under technical information, I will go down to where the pictures are. This is a site in Corinne, Utah. It's up near the Golden Spike Monument. And years ago, there was a government contractor who got a contract to build a high-powered station designed for researching the atmosphere. The grant ran out, the contractor walked away from the facility, and the landowner accepted a request from Hams to take it over and turn it into what this is today. So this is something that none of us could ever afford. This is the main antenna. That's a 94-foot tower. You can see this incredibly intricate system of wire antenna elements around it. This antenna has 6 dB gain from 4 megahertz through 55 megahertz or 60 megahertz, something like that. What they do with it is they bring the signal down, run it through splitters, and feed dozens of software dongles or SDR dongles that then allow software to do all kinds of things with that incoming signal. This thing can hear unbelievably well. That's the main antenna.
Did it pick anything up from the Chinese blue?
Just some tinsel.
Just
Yes, as it passed overhead. There's a second antenna on an 82-foot tower. This is hard to catch the scale of it, but that tower is 82 feet tall. The boom is made out of tower sections or something constructed like tower sections. This is a log periodic beam that has gain from, I think it's about 4 megahertz through 30 or higher. And it's not on a rotor. It's permanently pointed east. So if you're ever trying to listen for something in the eastern part of our country or Europe, that path, it's a phenomenal antenna.
I think something worth noting is this is a beam log periodic.
Yeah.
The first one was an omnidirectional
Log periodic.
Incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. That I looked up the model number of that first antenna, the omnidirectional. The shipping weight is over 5,000 pounds. All right. They've recently added a couple of new antennas. This one is a smaller log periodic, which covers part of that frequency spread, but is pointed, I believe, northwest. Let me take a look again. Yes, toward Pacific and Asia. So it's almost actually due west. It's like having those antennas connected to a radio on your desktop when you use this system. It's just unbelievable. Almost as unbelievable as the fact that it's free. All right, so going back here, I'm going to pull up a receiver on 40 meters. And it could be, well, no, first I'm going to pull up the AM broadcast band because that's something we can all relate to. Not everybody has operated 40 meters, but everybody's been on AM broadcast.
Can you select your audio output to be to the HDMI port?
Okay, I'm going to turn down the audio. This is KSL and they're running a BYU basketball game right now. I'm going to zoom in here. You can see this is a waterfall display. Does everybody have a little bit of experience at least seeing what those are and do? Imagine you're looking at an old analog AM radio with the slide rule type dial. This is that dial, only every place there's a signal, there's a stripe. And the higher contrast stripes are very strong signals. You can see some that are very, very faint. Those are distant signals or very weak signals. This defaults to KSL because it's a 50,000 watt station when you first pull it up, and that's where it's sitting right now. This little hump thing right here shows the filter that is tuning it to that frequency. So as I zoom in here, we're going to talk about some characteristics of signals. The first one being bandwidth. Okay, so I'll zoom in one more here. KSL is a really kind of interesting station to look at from a bandwidth standpoint because they're doing something that most stations are not. All right, so you see that we're filtering it for a slice right in the center of that big wide massive signal. That bright stripe in the center is the carrier. That's a 50,000 watt signal, even if there's no sound coming out. That is what we get rid of on single sideband to improve efficiency. 50% of the power of the radio station is consumed in that carrier. So if you can get rid of that, you can be much more efficient. Second, the area on the lower side and the area on the upper side are carbon copies of each other. So we get rid of one of those in single sideband to further increase the efficiency of the signal we're sending out for a given amount of power. So let me turn this up a little bit so you can hear what.
You may need to switch your audio to the HDMI port, your audio device.
Right, okay.
Maybe they're just playing silent tape.
Let's see, that's not what I wanted to do.
I'm not sure how to do that. It'll be the LG TV.
There we go. Okay. All right, so my microphone's still feeding Zoom, all right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so here's KSL playing. I'm going to zoom out and we're going to look at first of all, this receiver gives you a choice of filters. We're on AM wide right now. If we go to AM medium, listen to the difference in the sound. Did you hear a lot of the highs go away? There's also an AM narrow setting. Sounds basically like an old CB radio sound, right? Can you guess why we would ever want to do that? Make the sound worse by narrowing the bandwidth?
The signal itself was narrow signal. You'd avoid some noise that may be around.
Correct. If there is another signal on the band, or if you're trying to get a better signal to noise ratio, you could narrow the filter, sacrifice some of the audio quality, but get better intelligibility on the signal.
That's what we do with SSB. We're willing to sacrifice the quality. This is not an FM signal. It is half of an AM signal.
Right.
You know, but we're now channeling that 100 watts from everything down to a very narrow portion of that.
Yep. So if you're on single sideband, if you're on AM, the carrier's taking 50 watts, each sideband's taking 25. So instead we take one sideband, get rid of the other sideband in the carrier and put the whole 100 watts into that. So you get 4 times the power effectiveness. So let's see what difference it makes when we go to sideband. I'm going to go to lower sideband. Not a whole lot of difference, right? The volume dropped a little.
Volume dropped the back. I mean, it really.
Yeah. Okay, now if I go to upper sideband, you'll see the little indicator show that we're filtering now for upper sideband. And there's no change. They're identical carbon copies, so we can live without one of those. One other thing I want to show you about KSL signal before we move on is these. Let me go back to AM. I can't fit quite. Yeah. There's one thing I want to show you before we leave AM, and that's those bands off to the side. Go to AM wide. Okay, let me turn this up a little bit. Okay, if we go off to those bands on the side. So the signal, one other thing I want to tell you about bandwidth. So you see it goes, this station occupies from about 1150 to 1170 for its audio signal. That means that their highest frequency they're transmitting, their highest audio frequency is 10 kilohertz. That's for AM, that's pretty hi-fi. A lot of stations narrow that further to avoid interference to stations on either side of them on the dial. But if we tune out to this thing on the side here, can anybody want to hazard a guess as to what that noise is? And it's the same over here. That is HD radio. On each side of their main signal, they run a band of data, which if you have the correct radio, does anybody here ever been driving around and all of a sudden your AM signal sounds like it's blooming into FM quality?
Yeah.
That's your radio detecting the HD radio signal and using that instead of the analog AM. So that's just an oddity about KSL in the Valley here, at least. A lot of stations around the country use that. So let me zoom out and show you a station that's running very narrow. Let's go to 1120, KANN in Roy, and zoom in there. First of all, you see it's darker colors, so that's a weaker signal. This station only occupies from 1115 to 1125. So the highest audio frequency they're sending is 5 kilohertz. And you can tell a big difference in the audio fidelity when you drop that off. But because AM is mostly voice programming for most stations now, it's not that noticeable. What it does is that over here, just above that station, down below here, the station for this, for example, where the cursor is now, where it shows 1110, there's a station there. You can see its carrier. It's very, very weak. Its sidebands, if they're running 5 kilohertz of audio modulation, go out right to the edge and touch that one from KANN and Roy. If they were both running 10 kilohertz, there'd be a mess where they overlap. So that's what they're trying to avoid. So those are the two extremes. These guys are running narrow because they want to be courteous at night, and maybe they own other stations on the adjacent frequencies in other markets. KSL is considered a nationwide asset, 50,000 watt clear channel station. So they cut it loose. And besides, they're going to be wide anyway because of those two bands they run for each. No, every AM station is allowed 20 kilohertz of bandwidth, so they can run 10 kilohertz of audio. But to run the HD radio, yeah, they have to apply for an augmentation to their license to do that. Yeah. Yeah, so they did have to do that. All right, so now by comparison, these are very wide signals compared to what we do in ham radio. All right. And they're done that way because consumers want decent audio. They want to be in, if a song comes on it, they don't want it to sound like it's coming through a tin can. So now let's go to someplace where that's the accepted norm. 40 meters. Look at all these signals and look how narrow they are. Now at night, everything from 7,200 on up in the rest of the world outside our region is the primary user is shortwave broadcast. So at night, most of the hams on the air are down below 7,200. So let's tune one of these in. Let me bring up the audio a little bit. Does anybody want to guess why he sounds like a frog?
Not right on the same frequency. It seems like.
Okay, but on AM that doesn't matter. When a single sideband transmitter deletes the carrier and one sideband, in order for it to make sense, to be decoded into audio, you can understand the words. Your radio has something called a beat frequency oscillator, or BFO, that fakes it out, and that takes the place of that carrier. It generates a carrier within the receiver that takes the place of the one that was stripped out by the transmitter. If those aren't exactly on the same frequency, you'll get that word effect where it's either like this. Okay, so what we need to do is tune him in a little better. Now down here on the frequency controls, they apparently are operating on 7190. If I hit this kilohertz button, it'll snap to the nearest kilohertz. And that will usually be perfect. Now, I want to show you this signal here. Do you hear that carrier going by? That's because that's an AM transmission. These guys are operating AM. That's still legal on the ham bands with certain limitations. So let's go to AM medium. And of course he stops.
Looks like it's still on sideband. Look at the carrier. It's not.
This mouse goes to sleep on me. Yeah, lower sideband. So there's two things happening here. One is we're listening to a weak AM signal. The other is that a station on an adjacent frequency is running sideband and overlapping it. You see the signal down here? This is what single sideband sounds like without that beat frequency oscillator, substituting a carrier for the one that was stripped out and transmit. So we have to put it back in. The convention on 40 meters is lower sideband. Sounds a little bit like this now, so I'll click the kilohertz button and it'll snap it to perfect. But remember, KSL was taking up 20 kilohertz and that other station was taking up 10. Look at where this little filter line is showing. It goes 7175 is where their carrier frequency would be. And it's going 74, 73, 73 kilohertz wide. And that's enough bandwidth to get, and that's why it's so much more efficient than AM, traditional AM. And if you look down here, it'll tell you what the width of the filter you've selected is. We're on lower sideband medium right now, and it's 2.49 kilohertz wide. The widest filter they have for lower sideband is 2.8, which gets full fidelity of this there, but it also gets more interference. So can you kind of see how this puts a WebSDR can let you look at signals and kind of get an idea visually of what bandwidth is and what filters are. I know that when we first started the 10-meter net, we had a couple people who were constantly transmitting over the net. It was because they had set their receive filters into such a weird setting that they couldn't hear the net, but they were on the frequency, so their transmissions were coming out. So you need to know how to set your filters if you do HF. Let me show you some of the other receivers that are available here, because it's really pretty amazing what you can do with them. We were just listening to what's called the yellow server, and it shows you the bands that covers. The green server covers 30 meters up through 6 meters and uses a different antenna. No, I'm sorry. That uses the same antenna. The blue server has more limited coverage, but it also covers some of the shortwave broadcast bands that are not ham bands. This one that they call teal has a northwest pointing beam. The magenta one here has an east pointing beam. We saw the pictures of those a few minutes ago. There's a new one now that they're calling the peach, and that can cover 2 meters and 70 centimeters and part of the aircraft band in the Salt Lake Valley. That one's positioned up on the East Bench in Mill Creek. So, for example, if we go here, we can look at the entire 70 centimeter band. Oops, that's the lower one. Let me go to 448 to 450 because there's a net I want to tune into here, just to demonstrate it for you. All right, so there's the Ensign peak repeater. And we can set a squelch for that. Oh, it's on. It's on. It's just slow. So have you ever been on the intertie and listened for 3 or 4 hours and all you ever hear is, hey, can I get a radio check? If you've got this access to this, and this also has the ability to record, by the way. If we scroll down here, audio recording, start. You can do that, pick up your handheld and make a recording of yourself and then go back and play it back to see what you sounded like. So that's a tool that just about everybody can use. If you made an antenna improvement, it will even also show you on some of these receivers, and this is one, the signal strength. And it shows you not only in S units, but it shows you in dBm. So if you see this number dancing here, 75.43442, whatever. If you go and make an improvement to your antenna and you manage to get 6 dB gain out of your antenna, you can come back and that number will be minus 69 point something. You can actually see how much improvement you've made in the antenna just by going on your laptop or your computer. All right. Knowing the band would be dead by the time we had our meeting tonight, I pulled a couple of recordings off 10 meters. And I just want to show you, some of them are kind of dramatic. Let me start with filtering CW. Is it loud enough you can hear it? And hear when I talk over it? Okay. So here is where we're tuned. That's the difference a wider filter makes. You hear the increase in noise that comes in? Do you want to guess what this horizontal stripe is? It's a signal that suddenly appeared on the entire band at once, just for a brief second.
Lightning?
Yep.
What is it? Lightning?
Lightning.
Where I grew up in Montana, we had a radar system that was on one end of the base there. And on AM radio frequencies, you would hear about every second or two as this radar would go around. And it wasn't that they were transmitting on that frequency, but they were transmitting a powerful enough signal that it blanketed a large portion of the AM band.
I'm going to jump ahead a little here. Okay, I want you to just kind of watch what happens to the signal to noise ratio as this filter changes from wide to narrow. Listen to how much easier this is to copy. Well, use your imagination if you can't copy code right now. They're set to wide. Here I got rid of all that extraneous noise. If that signal were so weak you could barely copy it, that might be the only way you could pull out what the guy's saying. Now here are two signals, two CW signals that are both audible at the same time, and it's really distracting. So here we're going to pull in the filters, and you can do it manually, not just with those buttons down below.
You get some really good weak signals.
Yep. Did you hear how it just made that high-pitched one disappear? And you can pull out the weak one down below. Another lightning hit somewhere.
That's another radio operator that bought a radio.
That's another converted CD. Yeah.
Spark gap radio.
Yes, it is now. Yeah. Mostly gap. Okay. So I just wanted to show you, as you change the frequency of your receiver, the audio pitch of that CW will change. All right, I'm going to skip tuning CW2 and jump right to tuning sideband. All right, so tuning SSB and CW. Okay. Lima Uniform 8, I think, is Argentina. This is 10 meters this afternoon. Somebody who can't hear either of those stations is calling CQ. We can hear him, but he can't hear either of them. That's the way 10 meters is sometimes.
And that's because of the propagation where they happen to be on the planet, right?
Right.
Where
So
this receiver is, it's able to pick up both of those signals.
no, it's not. It's location, not quality of the receiver.
Right.
So if skip off the ionosphere is coming down in an optimal place of 1,500 miles away, say, two stations that are 1,500 miles away can hear each other fine and have a conversation. Another guy who's right in the middle of them can't hear either of them. So he starts using the frequency. If they're all lined up and we're 1,500 miles away from the middle guy, we can hear all three of them. But and for us, it's interference, but for them, they don't even know. Let me show you what it sounds like if you're on the wrong sideband. And let me explain a little bit about how the convention came about to use lower sideband below 10 megahertz and upper sideband above it. There is no nothing in the laws of physics that dictate that that's any better or worse. It's strictly a carryover from the days when early HF transceivers had a 5 megahertz VFO and a 9 megahertz IF. I won't get into the math there, but they were set up to produce only lower sideband below 10 megahertz. If you then took the high side of the signal to do the upper bands, it was automatically upper sideband. Modern radios can do both. You'll see on some radios, some new radios have a button that says SSB in reverse. A lot of them now say USB or LSB for upper and lower, and they will default to the correct one based on what band you're on. But it's kind of like the vertical for FM, horizontal for sideband antenna thing. The antenna doesn't know the difference between modes. It's just a convention that people use. All right, so we talked about lightning just for a second. Check this out. This is linked from the Utah WebSDR site. It's showing in near real time lightning hits all over the US. So why is this important? It's important because if you want to make a QSO with someone in Alabama, you might want to wait until that calms down. Or the higher you go in frequency, the less it will be, the less effect it will have.
So the lines are indicating the receivers at those locations are hearing the lightning strike.
Correct.
Okay.
There's one right by the Great Salt Lake. That's not indicating a lightning strike there. The lightning strike is being received by a receiver there.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It hears the lightning.
Yep.
strike.
So I just switched to the Minnesota map, and I'll switch to Texas. And you can see it's kind of a way to zoom in and see where it's happening. And I think before I'm done, I went to Florida. Not sure.
Red Sword too. That's an easy one to remember.
Yeah, that's why they have a link in that. But if you can turn off that little tick sound when it hits, you can also turn off the thing that makes the green lines to the detectors. So these are all tools that are available from that website. So let me wrap up here by just showing you how the site is laid out. Let's see. I have this one bookmarked because I use it every day. All right, so down the middle here, this thing could really use a redesign from a graphic standpoint. It's kind of hard to follow, but there's a ton of information here. So these are all the receivers, and down below it, there's a little bit of tech support if you're having a hard time getting it to work. Down here, there are links to some other WebSDR receivers. Now just think about this for a moment. There is one of these in Maui. So after it's dark here, you can switch over there near Asia, just clear as a bell. They have them in Europe. They're not all linked from here, but they have some in Europe that can listen to those guys like you're a local. So basically lets you just plop yourself down as a receiver any place in the world that they have one of these things located. Then there's a little bit of news about what's going on at the Northern Utah WebSDR. This is not directly supported by any club. This is a group of hams doing it, but they're their own 501c3 corporation, and they do accept donations. And I would encourage you, if you find you end up using this every day like I do, to send them a few bucks. Now in the right-hand margin here, like the Beehive Utah logo with an antenna on it. They have a YouTube channel. I haven't looked at it yet, but I would imagine that it's got some technical details and maybe some screenshots of fun things happening. There's the donation link. And then down here, contact info, technical information we looked at. It goes into as much rabbit hole detail as you could possibly want on how it's built, what it's made of, what receivers they use. There's a Facebook group. And then down here is the blitzortung.org website that helps you find where the lightning is hit. And under technical information is what so if you're looking for a good picture for your QSL card, this is where you can show your people if they ever ask, how's that coming in on your computer? You can look at that. It's a remarkable antenna.
Well, how much antenna, how much is it dies?
You can see it.
It's I think some of the wires. Oh, I didn't mean to hit that twice. Come on. Some of the wires do double duty, but all those, I think the ones with insulators are purely guy wires. Or the ones that have it. I don't know, that can't be right either because the way they're spaced. They'll put insulators in a wire when they don't want it to pick up a signal from another wire. So they'll use that to break it up so it's not a resonant length. But these arching wires, I don't know anything about the theory of how this thing is put together. Only that somebody spent a whole lot of time on a computer. And it's an amazing antenna to use.
This is about to go by Army installations because they have
Yeah.
this, and you're just like, how does that work?
Yep.
I've seen them. Oh, they're just amazing.
And then this one, again, this one is pointed east all the time. 87-degree bearing.
That is a massive antenna.
That is. Well, if you look at the scale, I mean, the boom's got to be 60 something feet.
Yeah, we would say 60 feet anyway.
Because the tower is eight.
No.
You'd have to buy houses 2 on either side of you, but it's
And this setup is only for receive, but there's no transmitting.
correct. Yeah, the neat thing about it is what it's doing technically, it's taking the entire band at once and turning it into 2 signals that they abbreviate I and Q. And if you have those 2 noise sounds coming into your computer sound card, software can put back together a receiver at any point in the whole band. So they distribute the I and Q signals over the internet to your computer. And they can do that to, I think they've had as many as 165 people on one server at a time. So this is a big operation. I mean, they've had to upgrade the internet connection and do a few things up there, and out in the wilderness, that's no small task. So, well, does anybody have any questions about what you can use this for, or anything I've mentioned tonight? Maybe
I can tell you, I use it once in a while when it's field day and that kind of stuff. And it's nice to, especially when I'm getting ready to use my radio, and I test to see if I'm getting out, or you know, if I think that I should be getting something, I'll go and point east. If I think I should be hearing nothing, and I'll go over to the SDR and see if they're getting anything.
Okay, that's not what I wanted. One caution about that, you reminded me about something. This is great to have fun and test conditions and listen to your own signal and see where in the world signals are coming in from. So if you can hear it decent on that antenna, you might have a shot with something on your house. You can't use it for contests or awards because it's not your station. If you're going to apply for DXCC, worked 100 countries, or you know, or use it in the RRL sweepstakes contest, you can't count a contact that was made that you could only make with that receiver as an aid. Field day, everything has to be within a 1,000-foot circle. So,
Well, that's not why I use it. I use it to test to see if I'm getting out. you know, and if I can hear it, and yeah, so. Heck, on field day, we're not even near a lot of times we don't have internet connection, I can't get anywhere, so.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the field that you go to. I know UARC sets up a network, a Wi-Fi network, just for logging between different locations, so that if somebody at the 40-meter station knows that somebody else at another position has already worked that station, they know they can only work them if it's a different band, or that kind of thing. And they can also download score or offload scores to the internet through somebody's phone if they want to, that kind of thing. Oh, come on.
It wasn't last year, but the year before, I always travel with the UBARC people down at Strawberry. And a couple of years ago, we hooked up, we couldn't get very good internet where we were at. So we went about a mile away where there's a cell tower there that someone had a hotspot. We had a hotspot that was able to get full 5G connection. And then we set up a dish and shot it over to our area. So now we are at 300 kilobit. Now we're about at 20 meg per second. And so because we had to do the same thing. We set up stations everywhere, for logging and stuff, and watching movies.
Yeah.
That kind of bandwidth.
Yep. There's one more thing I wanted to show you. I want to show you a very specialized thing that I forgot to show you at first. How many people in the room here do CW at all? Okay. You don't have to use this CW tool that I'm going to show you here. And well, how is that possible? There's something called the International Beacon Project. Let me pause this for a moment. If you tune to one of these 5 frequencies over here, the Northern California DX Foundation operates beacons 24/7 from all these, from 18 different countries or locations around the world. Some of them, there's a couple of them in some countries, but so 14.100, 18.110, 21.150, so forth. It's really kind of slick what they've done. They've standardized on a particular Kenwood transceiver run by a little like Arduino type, controller. It sends out the beacon's call sign at 22 words per minute. Then it sends 4 long dashes, one at 100 watts, one at 10 watts, one at 1 watt, and one at 100 milliwatts, or a tenth of a watt. And so if you listen for a 3-minute cycle, they each take 10 seconds to get through their spiel. So if you're on one of these frequencies, you'll hear all 18 stations, or have a chance to hear all 18 stations every 3 minutes. That's not one of them.
Engine 81 and medic ambulance 81. Respond to chest pain at 3:30:60 Gordon LN. Access apartment. Respond on deck fire 2 near 4270 South. Engine 81 and medic ambulance 81. Respond to chest pain at 3:30:60 Gordon LN. Access apartment. Respond on deck fire 2 near 4270 South. Time of 1930. Respond on deck fire 2 near 4270 South.
She sounds like the lady on my Garmin in my truck. She says Van Girder Highway. It's recalculating. Yeah. So anyway, we're going to listen to this for just a moment, and you're going to hear some of these come by. Watch these change over here. This website syncs up your computer. It figures out the network delay, shows you the compensation here, and then syncs up what you're hearing with what you're seeing on this website. So I did this on 20 meters. So this is on 14.100. So listen as they come around, and you'll hear 1 or 2 of these stations. You can hear all 4 of those tones, which means it's getting through with a tenth of a watt. Watch this. So that's Venezuela. We heard that down to a watt. That's on a UN building in New York. Northwest Territories is coming in a little weak today. Next one's California. Hundred milliwatts made it through. The skip distance is just not optimal for Hawaii. But so if you want to find out what you can hear around the world at any given time, you don't even have to know CW or Morse code to be able to use this tool.
Well, that also tells you how well Morse code gets out when other things don't work so well.
Yeah, when you can hear 100 milliwatts, when you can hear a signal from California that's using less power than the light behind your phone, that's pretty amazing, you know. And there is a whole string of beacons on 10 meters. Let me just pull up the list to show you. Come on, get off the screen. Okay, so if we, all right, so I'm going to scroll through this. Take a look right about the middle of it. You'll see 15 watts, 2 watts, 2 watts, 20 watts, 5 watts, 2 watts, 3 watts. As we scroll down, I'll and look where they are. They're all over the country, all over the world. The ones below 29 or 28.2 are located usually in other countries. The ones from 28.2 to 28.3 are all in the US, and there are hundreds of them. Here's 1 watt dipole. There's one that I've heard a number of times here in Utah. It's in Sumter, South Carolina, running 4 watts to an attic dipole. There's another one I've heard out of Georgia running 250 milliwatts. It's just remarkable. So anyway, all right, well, that kind of wraps up what I had to bring you. I just want to put up that one slide that shows these URLs in case you want to jot them down. No. So sdrutah.org will get you to that magnificent receive site that has all the receivers and all the links to other stuff. And if you do want to play around with the beacons, they operate them on 10, 15, 20, 10, 12, 15, 17, and 20 meters. If you ever want to just see what's coming in on HF from anywhere around the world, 3 minutes will tell you. 3 minutes on one frequency will tell you. And listen for that 4th long dash. That's 100 milliwatts. That's 1/10 of a watt. So it's pretty cool to play with. All right.
Do you have any other URLs below that?
I do not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this beacon one was the one that we just listened to, right?
Right.
Okay.
And
Very interesting.
And the sdrutah.org has links to all the other stuff that we pulled up tonight. The blitzern.org or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And all the pictures and the technical discussions. If you get started on the rabbit hole of really looking into HF, you can get really far along without buying a radio. Just by looking, we don't have time to look into all the ones around the world, and the one in Maui was down when I was leaving from home. So, but they're really cool to play with. I remember one time I wanted to, there was some NFL game that was going to be going on in London, and I found a WebSDR over there that would pick up a local radio station that was carrying it. It was great. Did you hang in with us, Ragnar?
Maybe he was a chest pain.
How exciting was your presentation tonight, Paul? Well, let me tell you.
Right, we'll stop recording.
Okay.
That was awesome, man.